بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Jazakumullah khair for joining us on Juz by Juz, where we'll be looking at each Juz of the Quran in less than 5 minutes. Now we've reached Juz 7, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions two different surahs in this Juz. The first surah is the end part of Surah Al-Ma'idah, and the next part is the first Makki surah after Surah Al-Fatiha, which is Surah Al-An'am. Now, there are three things to remember regarding Surah Al-Ma'idah from this Juz. The first thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises some of the Christians from Habasha. As we know that some Muslims migrated from Mecca, where they were being persecuted, to Habasha, which is Ethiopia or Abyssinia in our times. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises them because of their response to Islam. Not that they all accepted Islam, but they accepted some aspects of Islam, and they were different to the other Christians that we know about at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The second thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions something related to the legislation. He mentions some food and drink which is halal and something which is haram. Now, the final thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions from Surah Al-Ma'idah, and this is the reason why it's called Al-Ma'idah, is the incredible story that occurs with Isa alayhi salam, where some of his companions asked for a miracle for them to witness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings down a table from the heavens, they eat from it, which the Christian narrative describes as being the Last Supper, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them that they should not disbelieve after they have witnessed this. But some of the companions of Isa alayhi salam, they disbelieved in this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finally, the last thing that He mentions in Surah Al-Ma'idah is, because remember, as I mentioned in the last juz, that Surah Al-Ma'idah is about fulfilling the pledge. And where are the pledges reviewed except on the Day of Judgment? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions how some aspects of the Day of Judgment where we will all be brought in front of Him to testify and to have our account reviewed. Now, the second part of the juz, which is the majority of this juz, is Surah Al-An'am. And Surah Al-An'am is a very beautiful surah. It is the second surah, Makki surah of the Quran. And we find that it begins with Alhamd. And something very beautiful about Alhamd, the word Alhamd, is that it occurs in every quarter of the Quran. Surah Al-Fatiha begins with Alhamd, which is the first quarter of the Quran. The second quarter of the Quran is Surah Al-An'am, which is this juz, the seventh juz. We find that the half of the Quran, which is Surah Al-Kahf, it begins with Alhamd. And then we find the third quarter of the juz, which is around juz 22, 23, juz Surah Saba and Surah Fatir, they begin with Alhamd. Every aspect of the Quran is with Alhamd. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions two particular words throughout the entirety of the surah, and this really shows us what Surah Al-An'am is all about. And when you're hearing the Imam recite this, when you're reciting this yourself from the Quran, you will notice this. The first thing is the word huwa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions His greatness over and over and over again. And He mentions this with huwa. He الذي خلق السماوات والأرض. He is the one who created the heavens and the earth. And then you have the second part, the second word, which is the word قُل. And the word قُل is a command to the Prophet ﷺ, where he is being told to confront the mushrikeen and talk about the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, right towards the end of this juz, we're still on Surah Al-An'am, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the incredible story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, he was challenging his people, and he says, he looks at the star, then he looks at the moon, then he looks at the sun, and he says, Hada Rabbi, this is my Lord, is this my Lord? And he's challenging them, and then he tells them every single time these things, they disappear, they are no longer seen in the horizon. He says, how is it that I can worship something that is not always present? And then he confronts the disbelievers, his people. He says, إني وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا وما أنا من المشركين. That he says, I have turned my face, I have turned myself to the one who created the heavens and the earth, and I am not of those who are of the mushrikeen. And then the Surah Al-An'am continues in this way, talking about the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over and over again. And inshallah we'll learn a little bit more about Surah Al-An'am in the next juz, and I hope you can join us for that. Until then, subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.